This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Your report found that the average daily pay rate for each contractor and consultant who worked on ArriveCan was $1,100 per day. That seems incredible to me. How do these costs compare to what would normally be paid for people working on this kind of project?
So that's a difficult question to answer when we really just focused in on the resources that we're working on ArriveCan, and that's where the average comes from. As I answered to a previous question, I would have expected that the dependency on those external resources would have reduced over time, but I also would have expected that the requirement to always ask for resources with 10 years of experience or more would have been better documented or justified. A mix is likely a better combination of lesser experience and 10 years or more, and that would have resulted in better value for money for taxpayers.
Thank you. And your report identifies that the $1,100 per day is substantially more than people working inside the public service would receive. Your report reveals shocking details about cozy relationships between the Trudeau government and the contractors at GC Strategies who got the ArriveCan contract. This company was actually involved in the development of the rules and requirements for making proposals. This seems to me akin to having the coach of one of the teams making the rules and directing the referee, an effective rigging of the process. Now, Liberals didn't want this audit to happen at all, which is why they voted against it in the House of Commons. You found that rules were broken when contracting vendors offered gifts, hospitality, and invitations that were not properly reported. So I'd like to ask, how many public servants received these kinds of gifts, hospitality, and invitations from contractors that were not properly documented or reported?
So I don't have exact figures at my hands, and I probably don't have an exhaustive list, but we did see that it was more than one contractor who invited individuals in the branch that developed ArriveCan, but we saw no documentation that any of those invitations that we saw through emails had been reported to supervisors, and that's what's concerning, is that would have helped the supervisor put in place measures to make sure that there wasn't apparent or real conflicts of interest.
So roughly how many individuals, and also could you provide the committee with a list of names of those who offered and those who received these kinds of invitations?
So we can go back through our file and look at what we have to provide you, but it would be really just linked to ArriveCan, and the department might be able to, or the agency might be able to provide you a more comprehensive list if you want to ask them when they're here.
Thank you. If I understood right, though, you are able to go through and provide what you have to the committee on that?
Will have, but it isn't in any way comprehensive. We'll see what we can provide you.
And just a final comment, I think the reason this is important is because it's clear from what we're hearing from the government that they are trying to use an internal investigation to pin this whole affair on one or two individuals. But the investigator who is supposed to be undertaking their internal investigation is actually subject to the existing chain of command. So that process is just as rigged, just as susceptible to influence as the original bid was. And with that, I'll end my time.
Thank you. Ms. Kuzi, you have the floor now for 2 minutes.
So we've established that this goes far beyond the existing criminal investigation, that there were existing relationships that you indicated, Auditor General, that could have provided bias or leaning towards serious contractors. My colleagues have established that there was no value for money for Canadians here. An app that was supposed to cost $80,000 ending up costing $60 million. We see $60 million spent, $12.2 million, potentially unrelated even to this application, 18% of invoices by contractors who did not provide supporting documentation, and even work being completed without security clearances. Regarding the contracting, when we look at all this, when we look at all of these discrepancies, this incompetence, possible malfeasance, who is fundamentally responsible for the contracting, Auditor General? Who has the final say on overseeing contracting for the ArriveCan app?
So I would back it up to say fundamentally that the deputy head, in this case the president of Canada Border Services Agency, is responsible for all decisions that are made within the department. That being said, there are delegations of authority that go to other layers of the public service, and I draw a difference between individuals who do the work and then individuals who oversee and make decisions. And those individuals are usually in management, director, DG, assistant deputy minister level. And they set the tone for making sure that policies and basic requirements are followed. And we just found a glaring disregard for that here. We could not find documented evidence as to who made the ultimate decision to choose a vendor or why that vendor was chosen, but we did see a contract requisition that was signed by an executive director in the department. In my view, a public servant who exercises their delegation of authority, signing on something, comes with a responsibility and accountability for that decision being made. And if they feel that they've been pressured or didn't want to make the decision, that they should have informed their supervisor or they should have documented, there are recourses that public servants can take if they feel that they shouldn't be exercising the delegation of authority that's granted to them.
Now, you've suggested that the value for money was not achieved. Did you also investigate the cost of using paper processing versus the cost of using ArriveCan over time? I know that on the CBSA website, it indicates that paper processing would have been almost $95 million versus the cost of the ArriveCan app. Looking for your thoughts on that.
So we did conclude that the best value for money was not achieved here. There was some value, and I'll point back to our report in 2021. We issued 2 reports looking at border measures.
We witnessed CBSA then undergo a competitive process, replacing those 3 non-competitive contracts by then selecting the very same contractor that was the recipient of the contract in the non-competitive process. Is that true?
Yes, I think in this case, the contractor was involved in setting some of the requirements, and that should not happen. That really does limit competition. We found that the requirements that were used were so restrictive that the only vendor that responded to the request for proposal was GC Strategies.
Between the influences that CBSA would have had on the public, the GC Strategies had on CBSA, and what if information, was it emails, was it text messages, was it documents, was it letters, that you found evidence to suggest that there was a direct influence here?
So in this case, it was correspondence, emails between the vendor and individuals who were setting out the request for proposal. It was exact word for word requirements that were then used in the process. I would also point you to the Procurement Ombuds report, who outlined many other requirements. We just gave you a sample of some, but these were all very restrictive and likely limited competition, and in the end did, as the only vendor who responded was GC Strategies.
You know, from the beginning of the Government Operations and Estimates Committee study into ArriveCan, we have been told by Liberal members across the table that there was nothing to see here. And in fact, you could probably look at past committee studies or meetings to see that that is exactly what they said when we were undertaking or wanting to undertake this study. Little did they know, I guess, that you would find, and you have mentioned several times, that there was an alarming lack of documentation throughout the procurement process for this app, which I think is in keeping with what the procurement ombudsman stated in his report. So time and time again, we have heard that we should cut the public service or servants some slack because it was during the pandemic. And we even heard it today in regards to public servants working from home. Do you believe the glaring disregard for basic mismanagement and contracting practices, as well as the lack of documentation, can be sufficiently excused by the fact that it was during a pandemic?
No, I said it in my opening remarks. I do not believe that an emergency is an excuse for throwing the rules out of the window. These are some really basic elements that I would have expected to see. Documenting a decision on who is being selected and why they have the skills to carry out the work that you need done. Basic bookkeeping factors that I would expect to see. Invoices well supported, making it clear what work should be charged to what project that's ongoing. I think that my advice to public servants would be to document as you go. And we saw other contracts throughout the pandemic, while had opportunities for improvement, were not as glaring as the lack of documentation that we see.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's your signal, Mr. Brock. You've got the floor for about 2 minutes and 40 seconds.
Thank you, Chair. From $80,000 to approximately $60 million, and probably going to be continue more once we get some documentation. It's now abundantly clear to Canadians why the Liberal government under Justin Trudeau and its members did everything in their power to shut down your audit. They voted against your audit. They routinely shut down committees. Just last week, they shut down the committee that you and I were involved in when it was revealed that the RCMP were investigating. All of a sudden, they brought a motion to adjourn. And just last week, a release of the preliminary report by the CBSA investigator was too scary for some Liberal members, and they required a complete shutdown of witnesses to study the ArriveCan. So it's abundantly clear what they were trying to hide. This is a gross misuse of taxpayer funds. You indicated the public service should do better. This is an example of the worst record-keeping practices that you have seen in your tenure as the Auditor General. Do you believe there should be, in terms of moving forward, the CBSA has promised to make recommendations, to follow your recommendations for changes internally. But to the Canadians who are watching this, who have now realized that this government has abused and misused their taxpayer funds, what civil and criminal consequences should befall this government?
So matters of a criminal nature and decisions in that respect rest with law enforcement. In this case, the RCMP would be the experts to tell you what action, if any, is needed. That is not my place.
GC Strategies is under RCMP investigation, not for the ArriveCan app, but in relation to another application involving a software company out of Montreal, and the government as well, including the CBSA. That's the focus. The RCMP has never been focused on the ArriveCan app. During the course of your investigation led by Mr. Hanoush, shared to you, Ms. Hogan, and to Mr. Hayes, did you uncover elements of suspicion with respect to GC Strategies that warranted a potential referral to the RCMP?
So this is a bit of an unusual situation. Normally, when we're in auditing, the RCMP has not been referred matters. So in this case, they were referred in a matter around contracting. I am not aware if they've begun an investigation or where that investigation is going. So I didn't have to turn my mind to, do I need to decide if there are other things I should refer? I did have a conversation with the RCMP, and it was a very general one because our report was not yet made public. It was made public today only. I told them that if they would like to have access to our file, that they should send me an official request to do so, and we would be happy to provide them with any of the evidence that we have.
And thank you very much. I'm afraid that is the time.
How were procurement contracts decided to be tendered on a competitive or a non-competitive basis?
So that decision usually rests with the department making the decision. There are many reasons why you could choose a non-competitive contract. They're allowed in the procurement policies and directives. But when that happens, you would expect that you would clearly have documented your interactions with the vendor, and that you would have also documented clearly why you chose them. Typically, to go non-competitive, there needs to be a really good, valid reason. And in this case, there was very little documentation as to why GC Strategies was selected and how they could fulfill the requirements of the contract.
Okay. So in terms of, was there a deep lack of documentation? I guess, there is obviously not enough documentation in bookkeeping practice, and other places, other departments, there were. So what do you think made the difference in these bookkeeping practices? So it's a question, again, I think you should probably ask the department, but
when we spoke to many people, what we heard is that they were in the pandemic. It was a never before seen situation. The public service was asked to act quickly to support Canadians. But the basic elements that we would have expected to see just aren't there. It's a head scratcher for me as to why they're not there. I've definitely seen the public service do better. And it isn't just around contracting, but it was around project management, no oversight and no budget. It was around user testing on the applications. There was so many key elements that I would have expected to see documented that just aren't there. And when you don't have the records, many of the questions you're asking just can't be answered.